everyone. Just want to check to make sure this is on. Okay. Thanks, Cameron, for that nice introduction. I'm thrilled to be here, and as Cameron said, I'm a native Seattleite, and it really is a pleasure to be, in my hometown with all my nerdy, geeky space friends for kind of the first time. So, and if Jason Andrews is anywhere, he'll appreciate me saying "Go Dogs." If anyone, okay, there are a few dogs hopefully in the crowd. So as Cameron said, I'm Caitlin O'Keefe. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Planetary Resources, and I'm super honored to be among all of these folks here today. These really are some of the most impressive people that I personally know in the industry. And before I kind of hand it over to them to introduce themselves and talk about their amazing career paths to this point and what the future holds, I kind of wanted to give you some cliff notes of some of these people based on my personal experiences with them to kind of set it up. So Erica Wagner, Business Development Manager at Blue Origin, and a dear friend of mine who is also a co-founder of the Museum of Flight Future Leaders team here in Seattle. She also taught me how to geocache. That was a new thing that I learned this year that I'm really proud of. And if you haven't read her bio yet, I would suggest not, because it's going to make you feel like you're really underachieving every single day. Erica, you see her name a lot in the Seattle community, and I'm sure also the international space community. She's certainly an important kind of figure here in the Seattle space community, and I'm happy to call you a friend. And a big congrats for the 4th launch and re-land for Blue Origin. Really excited. Ray Ramadurai, Principal Avionics, Communications, and Power. He's got the longest title, Planetary Resources, who's responsible for really the brilliant brains within our Arcid spacecraft. He also makes sure of being my colleague that I do not post non-ITAR compliant files on Dropbox or social media, which, I heard upon my interview at Planetary Resources that I could potentially be prosecuted in a federal court of law for posting our avionics boards on Twitter. So if you're wondering why we don't have more images of our spacecraft on social media, it's because Ray's maybe a little bit gun shy, but that's his job. Don Widener, owner of Formidable Ventures. He's also an investor in Planetary Resources and a great friend of the team at Planetary. He's often at our team barbecues every Friday. He's also been a big part of furnishing our office to be industry appropriate, as I call it. And he can talk more about this. But the funny story about Don, and I laugh hysterically every time I think about seeing him drive up the driveway to Planetary Resources in his Tesla with the hatchback open and a life-size Boba Fett hanging out of the back. So if you come to the Planetary Resources office, Boba Fett is our security guard at the front there. And I almost got fired for calling him Boba Fett the first day that he showed up. And as Cameron said, I'm not a rocket scientist and am relatively new to the space industry. And advice for anyone who's thinking about making the switch to space, make sure all you young kids over here, you know your Star Wars and Star Trek folklore, and all episodes, not just the new stuff.
That's good.
Because your bosses will probably be on the old episodes. Ooh, burn. And I've just met Chris Boschhausen. I said it right?
Yep.
Kind of. Who's the entrepreneur in residence at Data Collective VC. And I just met him, but I can confirm that he's a super cool dude, so he deserves to be on the stage. We do have some past connections today that we are reminiscing about when the Antares rocket exploded, carrying both of our team's spacecraft in the Transformers movie-worthy explosion that happened back in 2014. So we kind of certainly both connected on that and know what it's like to experience failure. But in the spirit of NewSpace, we pick ourselves up and we get on the next rocket, right? So all these amazing people on our panel currently making huge impacts in the commercial space sector, many of them here locally, which is fabulous. But they really have so much experience in other industries and areas of study. So today we're going to learn a little bit about their unique backgrounds and how it brought them to their career today, why they made the move into the space industry, and where they see their careers and the industry going. So I kind of turn it over to our panel here, and maybe start with Chris Boschhausen. And if you could tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to sitting in this chair here today.
Yeah, so I wish that I'd gotten here on a Pan Am space shuttle that got me from Sydney to here in 4 hours, but that doesn't exist yet. But the reason why I'm in the space industry is that's sort of what I've always wanted. And, you know, I saw the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was a kid and grew up on space, but, you know, there was no real space industry in Australia, and I was kind of frustrated. And obviously by the time 2001 rolled around, you know, my big question was like, where's my space station? What happened? And so space, at least, you know, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, sort of went through a bit of a slowdown. And in Australia, there was, you know, since having launched the third satellite into space with a British-US collaboration in the late 60s, Australia hadn't launched anything really of note into space. And so there was no industry at all there. And I originally thought, well, let's just be a test pilot. Let's go off to NASA, become a pilot. So I went to, when I was 17, to the Air Force Academy in Australia, went through the whole interview process, and then about 2/3 of the way through, they grabbed me by the collar and pulled me out of the line and said, you know, you're colorblind? And I was like, what? And so apparently I failed the colorblindness test. Which apparently it wasn't, I only failed by a little bit, and if I'd known, I could have gamed it, but I didn't know. So that door closed, and I was like, well, damn it, I'm just going to build my own goddamn rocket. And so that's sort of the impetus for the path that I'm on, which was space was expensive. It seemed to be the domain of governments. It was really hard to build anything. So I figured if I'm going to build my own rocket, I either needed to be ultra rich, or rockets had to be cheaper and easier. And I was at a conference in 2004 in Vancouver during October, and it was an event that happened in the Mojave Desert. And on a whim, a bunch of 10 of us booked a flight from Vancouver down to LAX, got a rental car and drove into the Mojave and watched Scale Composites win the SRE X Prize. And on that day, looking up, seeing this plane, I had this realization that, you know what, space is no longer the domain of governments, and that gave me the confidence to later on move on to help start Planet Labs with my co-founder Will Marshall. This realization that commercial space was now possible and that we could do it. And that's sort of the abridged sort of version of how I got here.
Thanks. Ray, would you like to talk a little about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I think there were kind of two things that happened when I was in high school that sort of led to the career path that I ended up on. First, someone gave me a great book by Tracy Kidder by the name of Soul of a New Machine. If you haven't read it, it's spectacular. I strongly recommend it. And then second, the Lunar Planetary Lab at the University of Arizona was doing a crater counting study. And they wanted to get computers, or manual labor, a bunch of high school kids, to come in and circle craters and measure their diameters so that they could do study and analysis and so forth. And so a friend of mine and I got involved with that program, and we thought, this is really boring. Why are we sitting here drawing circles and measuring craters? And instead, we took some images on a brand new scanner the school had, and then wrote some code in Pascal, I know, and then effectively automated that process. In the course of doing that, I got particularly excited about Mars and thinking about space exploration and so forth. And that sort of launched me down that path. But in parallel, I was doing all of this computer work and building machines and the like. And I got very, very lucky because at the time, Hughes, which then became Raytheon, was also looking for interns. So when I got into college, I got a job working on EKB, which was one of the last strategic missile defense programs. And so they took this 19-year-old kid, put him through the clearance program and so forth, and then put him in a lab and said, okay, here's an avionics platform, get it tested, get it ready, this is flight hardware, and it's going to launch in 6 months. Of course, delays happen and so forth, but I got a chance to do that, and at the same time be a part of SETS, which is the Students for Exploration and Development of Space. And when we got the EKV program to the point where it was ready to do our first launch, they invited a set of us to come into a room, and they said, okay, you're going to see some classified stuff and so forth, but this is the launch. You're going to get to watch it. We watched the target go up from Vandenberg. We watched our vehicle go up from Kwajalein. And I remember feeling the tension in the room as the rockets went up and everybody getting excited and hearing, okay, we've acquired telemetry, okay, the cryo system is running, okay, we've got images, so on and so forth. And then eventually, this ground-based telescope shows us this bright flash as the two vehicles intercept. And I thought, oh my God, I'm hooked, right? There's nothing past that. And so I graduated from school, and then the other passion came back, and I got an opportunity to go and work at Intel. And at the time, the CPU wars were very strong. It was, how fast can you get to the highest possible frequency from a processor standpoint? So we worked on everything from the original Pentium 4 all the way through the Core i7 and so forth. And I actually started out as a test engineer doing testing, transitioned to being a designer, and then finally an architect, where we got to make that transition from what is the fastest thing we can make that draws the most power to something where it's now a ratio. It's about how efficient is it, how many watts per MIP, what's the least amount of power we can get for the same capability. And that was tremendously exciting because it represented a real change that I saw happening both in that industry and in the space industry. So we went on and did that for a little while, and then I saw a note that an old friend from SEDS had left JPL and was going to Seattle, and so I sent him a note and said, Chris, what are you doing? And we got to chatting, and eventually I decided to make a bit of a career switch back to the other side, to that other passion, and ended up at Planetary Resources, where we had this great chance to come up with a really new way to do spacecraft avionics and power and comm systems, and to actually try something that was very different than what had been done traditionally in the aerospace world. And so I tried to bring as many of sort of the concepts and practices from industry that I'd been exposed to and apply them to the aerospace world and to small spacecraft. And so that's where we are today, and it's been an unbelievable journey. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Ray. Erica?
So I don't remember a time when I wasn't a space geek. By the time I was in kindergarten, my parents could have told you I wanted to be an astronaut when I grew up, and I just never grew out of it. And I was lucky enough when I was in high school. I thought I was going to go down a path of being a scientist. And I was lucky enough in high school to get invited to a Society for Women Engineers event at Georgia Tech, where I saw that for people who loved science but really wanted to get things done, loved being hands-on, loved that problem-solving aspect, that engineering would be a great career path. So I hopped in with both feet and spent a lot of years in school. But I got a chance to do 2 internships in my summers in college, one at Boeing and one at Lockheed Martin, both working at NASA facilities. And I found myself at the end of the summer feeling beat down. Feeling like this wasn't the industry I had been dreaming about since I was a little kid, or certainly it wasn't the role that I wanted in that industry. I felt like a very small cog in a very, very big machine. So I started looking at ways I could get involved and be sort of have a more strategic voice, but also a more detailed voice in what was going on. And I had a chance right around that time to go spend a summer at the International Space University. And I was at their summer studies program over in Europe, and I met people who were coming from all over the world and thinking about space in very different ways. And at the time, I also got a chance to meet the folks that were behind the X Prize Foundation and the Ansari X Prize. And I ended up at the same launch as Chris down in the Mojave Desert in the summer or fall of 2004. And I looked around me at that launch, and I realized that over on one side was Scott Crossfield, who had flown an X-15, and here's the head of NASA and the head of the FAA and the members of the Apollo astronaut families, and they looked like kids in a candy store. So I'm thinking to myself, well, you guys have seen everything that's gone on in the industry from the last 20, 30 years, and you think this is new. You think this is interesting. There must be something new happening here. And I decided that was the tidal wave I was going to grab a hold of. And I spent the next 8 years trying to find my way through the right paths and into a role where I could really make a difference. And I landed 4 years ago last week at Blue Origin, and it's been a good ride.
Hi, I'm Don Widener. I'm a native of Seattle. I left after school and I was out of state for 20 years and went all up and down the West Coast. I lived in Mexico City and I lived in Malaysia, but I ended up back in Seattle, and I'm glad to be here again. have a tech background, Intel, Hitachi, IBM, but I always wanted to do my own thing. I felt like the small cog in a big deal as well, and so I taught myself how to invest, and ended up doing well enough to quit my job and work for no one. So that was great, and my angle into space happened same as Erica and Chris with X Prize. 2004, I didn't get to go live, unfortunately, but 2004 I was working in a bank. And I saw what was going on with Peter Diamandis and the X Prize and Scaled Composites and Burt Rutan, and I just thought, I am in the wrong business. Again, kind of like Chris said, the X Prize made me realize, space could be a business finally. Finally, by 2010, I was able to meet Peter. He introduced me to Singularity University, which I highly recommend. Peter then introduced me to Planetary Resources, and I was hooked. I was seeing what they were doing. I was so excited about the team they'd assembled, the mission they had, and the investors they had as well, who had far deeper pockets than me, but I figured they're not going to let it go under, so I might as well sneak in myself. Couldn't be happier. And after Planetary, I actually got into Space Angels Network as well, which has just been fantastic. They actually brought me to the Mojave for the 10-year anniversary of the X Prize. So I got to sit across from Richard Branson and all these guys and sort of relive the moment a little bit.
Awesome. It's interesting to hear a common theme of kind of the X Prize, the moment that really grabbed you into the industry. I don't know if any of you want to talk a little bit more about that, like why, you talked about your specific experiences with that moment, but how did it make you see that this was, as you said, a tidal wave? How did that prize really encapsulate that there was a movement happening?
Well, I think the numbers are interesting. The Ansari X Prize was a $10 million prize purse. The teams that were competing for it spent over $100 million trying to win it. Paul Allen spent over $26 million to get Spaceship One off the ground. So someone can't do math, or else there's something bigger afoot, right? 26 teams from 7 different countries were in this competition with designs that ranged from aircraft lifted rockets to vertical takeoff and landing to hot air balloons. It was really the full spectrum of approaches, and you don't often get to see the birth of an industry all in one place. And you look back at the history of the automotive industry, and we had so many different kinds of cars in the early part of the century. You had electric vehicles and diesel vehicles and gas-powered vehicles, to see all of that foment happening and all of that chaos converging to one moment and one point in time is a special time, and I think that's what I was saying.
Yeah, I feel like even though, seeing Jonathan's presentation just before this, which was really about the human-machine evolution and how far we've come, at the end of the day, we're still a very primitive species and very superstitious. And I think that, for me, what the X Prize was empirical proof. And that actually works for humans. And before that event, everyone thought it was crazy. And no one really believed that that it could be won. And there's a little anecdote that Peter likes to tell about his attempt to get the prize funded. He ended up taking out an insurance policy that no one would win the prize. And one of the incumbent companies in the space industry did the due diligence for the insurance company and said there is no chance this will be won. This is a safe premium. So Peter was able to secure an insurance policy that in the event in the loss of someone winning the prize, they could be paid out. And then later on, that policy wasn't executed because Anusha Ansari came along and actually sponsored the prize. But it was only possible because people didn't think it would work. And when it happened, it clicks as that little aha moment. And I took that as a formula for everything I've done since. And so when we were raising money for Planet Labs, or when I was trying to get PhoneSat approved for launch, the PhoneSat was a project I did at NASA Ames where we took an Android phone and put it in a CubeSat. And that was it. That was a satellite. We did it with evidence, physical evidence, and you build it, and you show people, They believe it, they give you money, you launch it, you get photos, you show people the photos, customers sign up, they buy them. And so to this day, I still think it was the fact that Peter Diamandis was able to cook up a situation where he and Burt Rutan and the others could provide empirical evidence that commercial space could happen. And now you see, look at the opposition Elon has faced trying to build SpaceX and build commercial launch of government. It's the same problem, and he succeeded by doing it and showing the evidence.
Maybe we'll translate this into, Don, now present day, you are an investor in our company, Planetary Resources, and you talk about your involvement in the Space Angels Network. Obviously this moment kind of encaptured kind of a catalyst with the X Prize. But now, as an active investor in the industry, what type of deals are you looking for? What are you looking for in a company that's getting you to, invest your money, in a company like ours?
That's a great question. I'm involved in a lot of different angel investment groups and things like that, and I also study the stock market. But I've seen enough apps and the next Google or the Uber of blank, and when I study those are all, I consider those individual deals because they're only going to work if you have the best team and the best product and the best timing and the right financing and the whole thing. But it's funny, I don't think of the space industry as having deals yet. I still think of it as one big deal that has so many opportunities, and so I'm actually trying to connect with every space company I can because I'm learning along the way too. It's all every time I sit down with a founder of a new company or just a guy with a great idea, I'm learning, and it's helping me be better at what I'm doing, and hopefully I can share something with them as well. So I love seeing it all.
So I guess to go on the other side of that is putting the deal together. Erica, as business development manager at Blue Origin, and with such a kind of scientific and engineering-focused background, now your job is to generate business and revenue for the company. So how is your background and your academic studies prepared you to be a good business person in this industry and specifically for your company?
So my background was in biomedical engineering originally, and then transitioned into the aerospace world, and then worked at the intersection of the two. So I was basically doing astronaut health, the world's smallest healthcare niche market. But what that funny intersection gave me was an ability to talk between fields. Both aerospace and biomedical are very cross-disciplinary, and I had to learn how to speak between scientists and engineers, or engineers and doctors, or engineers and funders, or policymakers, and that sort of translational capability was what sort of ended me up in the business world where I am today. So I've had to learn how to speak business. That one didn't come quite as naturally, but I'm getting better. But what I'm looking for in the deals that we're making right now is we're trying to say, we've got a platform. We've got a space vehicle that's going to be going into space more frequently and more affordably than ever before. And who needs that? And it's a really interesting range of clients that we're talking to. It's government agencies that want to develop their technologies. It's university researchers who need to turn off the gravity switch in their lab. It's K through 12 educators who want to give great opportunities to their students, like the ones at Raisbeck. It's marketing groups that say, hey, space is really freaking cool. We want to associate our brand with that. And so it's the sales world, it's a different conversation with every single client. And I think that being able to bring the technology to it and be the credible broker on this side of the table has been really useful.
Cool. Let's go down the line to Ray. You on the computing and software side. You came from Intel and have a strong background in that. What are some of the philosophies or practices that you're bringing into your everyday philosophy of work at Planetary Resources that are coming from that other industry?
Sure. So I think one of the really interesting problems that we get when we try and go deep space is that when you're 1 or 2 AU out, the problem of autonomy becomes absolutely acute, and that actually drives the platform in a very unique way relative to what's been done historically. So you not only need to have very autonomous systems that can take care of themselves, that don't require the level of ground interaction that otherwise would be required for LEO or for for geo. But to actually achieve that autonomy, you have to have a tremendous amount of compute capability that can survive the environment and so forth. And so figuring out how to leverage a lot of what's been happening from commercial and the industrial compute world, and bringing that into the new space arena and bringing it into a platform that can survive that particular environment has been really one of the big challenges. And we're trying to figure out what the best approach to that is that leverages as much as possible off the shelf, because we aren't going to be able to completely design it from scratch, right? We're not going to be able to fab our own CPUs, et cetera. We'll have to be able to use what's out there. So figuring out how to make it work in that environment is really the challenge. And that's actually the thing that gets me excited every day is how do we, so I myself will never get a chance, I don't think, to go interplanetary. But I can build something that can. And that exogenesis is something that I'm absolutely fascinated by and I really, really enjoy. And it's something that keeps me coming in day after day and lets you leverage all of this technology that's been built to date and put it out there as an exploration platform.
Cool. And Chris, one of the things that we've talked about is you have this kind of, you've dipped your toe in, future thought leadership with Singularity and future tech, the tech industry in Silicon Valley, science and NASA, and, private companies like Planet Labs. And, us at Planetary Resources are starting to see this kind of convergence of people, from the workforce coming over, into in our sector. We get resumes from Amazon and Google all the time. And so from your kind of experience, seeing all different sides of that many-sided coin that we just described, what are some of the convergent zones that you're seeing right now, and how are all those themes kind of, playing harmoniously in the space industry now, and where do you think that's going to take in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Jonathan's talk previously sort of covered a lot of the messages from Singularity University, and one of the motivations for why I helped establish the university was I was worried that I might die before I got to go to space, and that it would just take too long to build this rocket. And so I thought, well, if I could just live longer, then I could have more time. And so one of the things about Singularity is, there's a lot of tracks there, whether it be medicine or computing or AI and robotics and space and all kinds of things. And so I sort of looked at the space industry, much like you said, as a whole. It's a large system of many variables, and they all can be solved simultaneously. And whether it be cost or price or risk or time, you can solve all of those. And so, Singularity was a way for me to maybe buy some more time to solve the problem. And so I think we're seeing a convergence of a lot of technologies, and your experience in one area can bring you insights in another. Just like your Intel background help you with highly efficient, low power space computing. We use cell phone technology. $3 billion or more is spent a year in developing tech for cell phones. And we leverage that investment to take other people's good work and apply it in a different domain. And so it's all connected. And maybe you work in biomedical, but later on that's directly relevant to something you're doing and a product you're selling.
Can I riff off that for a second? Because I think that's sort of that convergence zone is something that's happening more and more frequently now. When we were in the sort of the Apollo era, NASA was always at the forefront. We were doing a lot of spinning out from the space industry, but now more and more we're spinning back in. And we're taking other trends that are happening, and most of them are industry funded in semiconductors or in wearables or in AI and high power computing, and we're bringing them back into space. And one of the interesting questions for me is, as space becomes more of a conversion zone, now how do other people use space, right? And then it starts to spin back out. So we're sort of in this this constant back and forth, and I'm looking forward to that next expansion.
So I guess can I go to the next step off that is what's your advice, and this is a question for all, for anyone coming in from a VC or the investment side, from the science side, from technology, they're a software developer in Silicon Valley. What's your advice to those people about getting into the space sector? Because me personally, as a marketer, when starting my career in space, it was very intimidating, and it was hard to see where I might fit in. And there's traditionally been kind of a high barrier of entry to get into our industry, but now we, as you said, we're spinning out, and it's kind of absorbing these other industries around us. So what is your advice to, the Silicon Valley software developer who might want to make a switch?
This way?
Yeah.
So I forget who it was, the lady who was sitting here earlier about 2 hours ago mentioned about interview process. I forgot her name, sorry. But the question about, what is your extracurricular thing, or what are you passionate about? And that's a question I've often used as well, because you're a drive and passion to make stuff or want to build something, particularly in an engineering company, that should something attribute you should be able to channel at work. And that actually offers the key to how to get to where you want, which is make stuff. And relative to 2004, where it took roughly $26 million to win the X Prize, you can now build a CubeSat and get it into space for under $100,000. So, and there was an elementary school that launched their first satellite, an elementary school. It was great that we had a high school, now we have an elementary school. And so it's so easy now that people can be going into high school with flight experience. Not just going into university or graduating from university with flight, going into high school with flight experience. And so the cost are low enough and the accessibility is so high now that you can just do the thing you want to do, whether it be space or anything else. You can build your own MVP of something. And when you want to go for a job, you've got evidence that you can do it, and it should be really interesting to an employer. Or if you want to start your own company, you can get investment.
So I would just reiterate the point that I think passion is absolutely critical to it. I think the best hires that we've made have all come into it with a particular desire to do something very specific. And it doesn't necessarily have to completely align with your particular vision. It's much more important that they care about it. And to a certain extent, that's because, as people say sometimes, space is hard. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time. And the only way to overcome the challenges that are present there is the willingness to actually put that effort in. And you don't do that unless you actually care about it. And that's really, I think, one of the most important pieces. Second, I think one of the neat things that's been happening is people have been going back to a certain extent to first principles and looking at how to solve the problem in a new way with the capabilities that are now present. So when you look at everybody going out and vertically integrating all of their hardware and and their spacecraft and so on and so forth, they're doing that for a reason, because they're getting a benefit from expending the effort to go back and rethink that problem. And so people that want to come into the industry that have experience with thinking about that problem from the beginning, I think are going to have an advantage and have the right mindset to be able to come in and be very effective very, very quickly. So those are kind of the things that I would look for that we've seen that have made people somewhat successful in this space.
So at Blue Origin, we ask three fundamental questions in every interview. One is, are you excellent at what you do? And there's a lot of different ways that we figure that out. The second is, do you love space? And that is something that we are trying to sort of grok at every level of the company, whether it's finance and business operations or engineering or manufacturing. And the third one that we ask is, what's the last thing you built? Or if you're in the propulsion world, what's the last thing you blew up? So trying to figure out, we love people who are makers, hackers, builders, coders, and it doesn't have to be rockets. We love Formula SAE teams and FIRST Robotics teams. The guy that made an Arduino-based aquarium system in his garage. We have a blacksmith on staff. All those kinds of things are part and parcel to a company that is trying to make, and we love people who make.
And I echo that as well. For anyone who wants to start up and start a new thing, just do it. Just get hands-on, start building, build a team around your passion, and there are avenues now for space investing. Space Angels Network is a fantastic one, and build a team around your vision and your dream, and start earlier rather than later.
So I have one last question I'm going to give to Dawn, and then I thought we would open it up for about 10 minutes of Q&A for anyone else who has a question. And speaking of the passion that we've all talked about, you have your collection at home, and I thought maybe you could enlighten us all to what kind of toys you have in your garage.
So yeah, I'm a 12-year-old and I collect Star Wars figures. But it's great. It's half nerdy for sure, but I've honestly studied the Star Wars collecting business as in a significant way. I've been collecting for 10 years. I know the best, the rarest, the hardest to find, and I own it. I've gotten to know the owners of the largest toy stores around the world. I've met eBay buyers and sellers from every city in the world, and anytime I found something better than I already have, I get on it, I negotiate on it, and try to get it. You may not know, but Star Wars figures can be graded just like baseball cards. So you have them authenticated, you have them sealed in acrylic, you have them graded based on various qualities, and I always hunt the absolute best and rarest there are.
Has your collection appreciated at all over time?
Absolutely. In fact, it blows me away every time I'll look up a rare figure I have on eBay, or I'll call a guy I know in Chicago who runs the largest Star Wars depot in the world, and the offers I get are ridiculous. They're doing better than my stocks. So
Sound business advice.
That's right.
John Widener.
and therefore I'm running out of room at home, because it always seems like a good idea to buy more. I've added a room, I've knocked out walls, and half my garage is full as well. So and now I'm giving my life-size things to Planetary Resources because I'm out of room.
We're running out of room too. If you're
We aren't.
Yeah, Blue
does
definitely
make
needs
me-
something. I'd be happy to donate. And last thing I'll throw in, I can talk all day, but this isn't the Comic-Con. In addition to my Star Wars collection, I also have this phenomenal collection of screen-used movie props from Alien and the sequel Aliens. And one of probably my highlight that I've acquired in the last year is I have Sigourney Weaver's real flamethrower that she used in
my
the
God.
movie.
So maybe we can raffle off a tour at Dawn's house later. So maybe we'll open it up on that note to any questions from the audience. Just come on up to the mics. You're walking out, no question.
All right. Say that it's the topic. This is your career in space. So is it possible to approach, I guess, as somebody who's maybe thinking of starting some company or working for a startup, is it possible to approach investors for money for a project? So say that I want to launch one CubeSat for cheap to do one task. So it's not necessarily business, but it's a cool thing to do, and I don't have money, so is that a weird thing to do, or?
It's a great place for Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that facetiously, but Kickstarter, Experiment.com, Indiegogo, I mean, any of the crowdfunding, the number of things that are coming across that transom that are related to space is stunning. And a lot of them are having great success.
There are also SBIRs that you can go out and write a proposal as a small company or an individual and raise enough money to go do some of these projects. There are grants. Talk to people. I mean, it all depends on what you're going to get back from it, right? If the result is a great experiment or an experience or a paper, you'll find someone with the right mindset that's willing to make that exchange.
Thanks.
Ted Fest. Hi, I'm Mark Latham. I'm from Arizona State University with SETS, as well as the NewSpace initiative out there. And I started out floundering through school. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I'm on my 7th year in undergraduate, so
Dan Wilder over here.
The crazy thing is, though, I found a passion and love in astrophotography. So you'll see me running around taking pictures. I'd much rather take pictures of things that aren't moving, like the sky. Oh, it sort of moves. So I have a crazy passion for that, which encouraged me to go into systems design at ASU. I have a passion for that, but it is so obvious that I'm a right-brained person instead of a left-brained person. All of you are charismatic. You've gone through your life, you've been successful, you saw opportunities. What if I'm just flowing left and right between these two different mentalities that I'm honestly having trouble reconciling on how they fit? And so is this the right time to, force my way into a unique new job that I make for myself? Or what's your advice when it comes to that difference between left and right?
Maybe we all have answers, but there's this great saying, like, someone like a new musician pops on the scene and gets a #1 song, they seem like an overnight success, but most overnight successes are 10 years in the making, right? And it took me at least 10 years of complete futzing about figuring anything out between basically undergraduate and ending up in Silicon Valley. And it was mostly purely just by meeting people at conferences, getting friends, and having dialogues that helped hone those ideas. But I deleted 30 things off my LinkedIn last week that frankly were all embarrassing mistakes that were, 5 failed companies during undergraduate, which I'm like, well, I've done something good now. I can actually take those off finally. They're not my main credentials anymore. It's like anyone watches the TV show Silicon Valley. It's like, I have my Aviato, and so don't feel bad about it. It's actually pretty natural. And I only went to grad school, just so that I could actually buy another 4 years to figure it out. I got kind of lucky. And I met the right people at the right time, and you're doing the right thing, just being here. And, you might find someone that you hit it off with that helps balance you and helps you be successful.
I think the only thing I would say is just you don't have to necessarily make a choice between the right and the left, right? The combination of the two is what gives that success, because you need the creativity, and then you need the practical to be able to determine what pieces of that you take. So I wouldn't want you to decide one way or the other, and find a way to balance them.
Can you talk to my professors about that? Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm a student at UW. I just graduated with in a major in creative writing, and I'll be starting an MS this fall. So my question is that I've essentially pivoted from a BA to an MS in pursuit of going to space somehow, or being involved actually in the new space industry. Now I understand that there's another panel which will talk about the new space industry all over the world, but the new space industry is biggest and at its most vital on the west coast of the United States. So what advice would you give to a person who is not an American citizen and is therefore limited by arms trading regulations from participating in any way or form in this industry? Especially to Chris, because you're Australian.
That's right. I get this question a lot, particularly when I go back to Australia. It blows people's minds that I worked at NASA, and they're like, wow. They go to nasa.gov and they go to jobs and they click apply, and the very first question on a single page by itself is tick, I certify that I'm a US citizen, right? So the truth was I was a contractor at NASA. And you can work for any company, and you can get licensed. If you want to work on propulsion systems, you can get a DSP-5 or an export license for you to be able to work on that stuff. And so the road is definitely not closed, and it's really about taking the right door. And so after a lot of false starts, managed to get over here. Because I had met friends, the same answer actually, at the conferences who knew I could do good work. And eventually I was asked if I would want to work at NASA, and so I said yes. And I was a contractor there for 4.5 years. And it was, I was able to do that not because I went through jobs through a traditional application, but because I had shown people that I could do stuff and they were interested in me helping them with their projects. Right.
So another route is to actually be a user and a content creator, right? So the space tourism is open to people of all nations, and thankfully the Congress has seen fit to change those regulations. So you can come to a company like Blue Origin eventually, and we'll sell you a ticket, and we'll say come join us. Yes. But the question for me as a business development person is not how do I sell one ticket to one person who will have a great experience, but actually how do I find the people out here who can make a whole lot of money off of using my rocket? Right, so if you can find ways to create your own content and to create value from space, you can come be my client anytime. We'll enable you to go do what you want to do. So you don't necessarily have to be in a space company to be doing awesome things in space.
Okay, good, yeah. And if anybody in this conference wants to work with a creative writer who's entrepreneurial and has an interest in science, please do hit me up. Thank you.
Alice Hoffman, Program Manager for Enterprise and Space from the National Space Society. And I'm just wondering, what do you think that the real space industry is lacking that keeps people from having the kind of excitement and investment and money that they put into things like Comic-Cons and like Star Wars collectibles? What do we have to do to make real space as exciting as the movies?
Having a working flamethrower is one. It's funny, whenever I talk to my peers who are investors, I go down the list of what I invest in, autonomous vehicles, solar power, robotics, and then I say space, and they're like, you mean space? They don't even register it yet. There's a lot of awareness that still needs to happen, I think. But I think seeing, on the news, Blue Origin and SpaceX making things happen in front of your face, like X Prize did for us, hopefully these companies will do that for the next group. You see it actually happening, and I don't know, I think it has to make you believe it's real, because again, the dumbfounded looks I get when I talk about space, and especially if I zero in on asteroid mining, I usually lose the crowd. So I don't know, I think it's going to take some time. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
I don't know. I think it's building that fan base, and it's building that fan base early. For example, and I know I'm a terrible parent for having done this, but I took my kids to The Martian, despite the swearing, and they loved it, and they talk about it all the time, and they've connected with that in a very real way that I think they will remember going forward. And it's so building that narrative and building that fan base and that community with the folks that are out there around real space projects. And I love science fiction. I grew up on it. It's one of the greatest things. But I think the fact that it's real is its best selling point. And if you can tell that story and you can get people excited and build that out from an early age, then you'll have that fan base when the next project comes around and they want to get excited and so forth.
Great. Next question.
Hi, I'm Grant Atkinson. I'm here from Virgin Galactic, and I just wanted to ask you guys if you could talk a little bit about how you managed to avoid having your careers get stagnant after graduating, after getting a few years of experience and kind of learning the tricks of the trade, so to speak. How did you keep moving forward and keep advancing, doing the kind of things you wanted to do rather than just kind of get complacent in one place?
Question.
I lost all my momentum after graduating, and I took a year off to travel, and then went back to Australia and tried to start a space consulting business that was a complete disaster. And nothing really happened, and it was kind of frustrating. So there was this point of absolute stagnation for me. But I kept going to these things, and eventually, was said, hey, you want to come to NASA Ames and help us? And so I said, hell yeah, sold all my stuff and was gone within a week. So, you just get lucky sometimes, but there's no obvious plan, right? And, if you're committed, you'll figure it out. And just because, a 2-year lull in my case, I still got through it. But, it's not a bad thing, and you might learn something in that time that was relevant, and I certainly did, even though I wasn't being successful at that exact moment. So it's just patience.
I have an addiction to shiny new objects and to acquiring new experiences and new knowledge. And finding places where I can do that in a space world is actually remarkably easy. Whether it's a new conference or connecting with a new network or working with, going to a new class, in a training course or something like that, or finding opportunities within your own company to learn and grow. Especially in a company as small as Virgin or as small as Blue Origin, there's always new touch points. You're never that stuck at being the single point in a single widget maker. There's so many more things going on around you, and you have an opportunity to keep reaching out and grabbing them. So don't hesitate to reach out and grab for something shiny.
I'll add one more quick thing too. Yeah, just having the anti-stagnation mindset has always worked for me. I worked for Intel. It was probably the best company I've ever worked for. But after 5 years, I thought, I've used them for everything that they're gonna do for me. So I'm gonna move on. And I bounced around and learned different angles of different ways of doing things, and kept it interesting by always moving. The biggest mistake I see a lot of people do is wait for the promotion that's going to make you excited again or something, because that often doesn't happen. You have to find your own way.
Take the opportunity where you see it. If the opportunity is there, take it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm Bruce Pittman from NASA Ames. I remember years ago I was at a conference at Disney World, amazingly enough, and we had Jim Cameron on the panel, and this is right before we invited him off for the NASA Advisory Council. And he said something interesting too. He said, NASA, I've got 2 pieces of advice for you. He said, 1, you need to tell your story better, and then 2, he said, and you need a better story to tell. So I think we've got a better story to tell now, but how do we tell our story better? What aren't we doing in this? Because there are some really cool things going on, and we've got the videos and everything, but again, we're not connecting in some way. I was just wondering if you guys had any advice on how we could establish that connection.
Live streams of your launches is a huge step, and congratulations. But I found because in the space industry, we tend to want to be stealth for a while. There's a lot of risk. It's embarrassing to make mistakes. So you kind of want to get everything slotted out. And I found at Planet, that attitude actually stuck around. Once we had been secret for 2 years and then announced we were doing it, we still had built a culture of secrecy. And it's taken a long time to retrain the company that it's okay to share and talk about what we do. And for a long time, we had new employees saying, "Can I tell my mum what I do?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "Yes, of course." But we had built this culture of we're a stealth startup, if things might go bad, we don't want to, ruin everything from the get-go. And you guys took a big step with, doing the live feed, and, it went well. But I think more of that, because as you said, I think, people can connect to that and relate to it. And so just being exposed, I guess, and taking a risk of showing your mistakes in public.
I think accessibility is a really key element. I think one of the things that I've seen kids really connect well with is going out to rocket launches, for example, which are inherently unsafe in certain ways, but just that mere fact is so much fun for them to go and experience it and so forth, and making not just I don't want to say like a dry video or something, but actually creating an experience is what they will remember and what they will connect with. And sometimes that's tricky. It's not even always necessarily easy or broadly accessible. But when that exists, I didn't get to go to the Ansari X Prize, but the experience that these guys described, I know that feeling, and that's the thing you remember, when you can get that connection through an experience because it's accessible.
And it's not about our stories, it's actually about their stories, right? It's about the stories of the users, the ones who are experiencing it. It's not necessarily about the story of the building of the rocket. It's about the story of what the rocket enables for each one of those audience members out there. And I think we're just getting to the point where we can share that with an investor and say, here's where you make money. Here's where gravity affects your bottom line. Here's, for a student, here's where you get to put your hardware on the rocket. And for an artist, here's where you can come and be a part of our world. So I want to hear those stories as much as I want to hear our own.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And we are at time right now. Maybe one quick question, and then I think we have a special announcement. Well, we'll make a special announcement afterwards.
It's going to be extra special
So
now.
yes, we do. Go ahead.
So we heard advice for, I think, a little bit of a younger person going into the NewSpace career. Anything that you would add for someone, such as myself, a little further along in their career who wants to make the shift?
That's a good answer.
That's it.
Well,
There you are.
sorry. I was going to say, I think a lot of this still applies, and I'm currently learning songwriting. If I were to apply for one of these jobs earlier, I mean, what's my thing I do? What was the last thing I built? Well, it would be a 5-minute song, right? I've never done that before. It's kind of fun. I'm 38 years old. I wrote a song, and I'm like, I could do that. And so same for you or anyone else. I don't think it's ever too late to learn a new skill, and I'm really surprised about how just seeing that my brain could do that and that my neural plasticity is still there is kind of exciting. So I think the advice is actually the same, and if you want to get into something, start dabbling in it. The first couple of things you might make might not work. I can guarantee you my first couple of songs are really bad, and I will never, ever play them to anybody.
Please. So I think actually that is a perfect segue into our special announcement. So it's like we planted you to say that. Ophir, would you like to come up and, I don't know if Doug King's in the room. Doug? Going to round out our session with a cool announcement.
Hey, thank you, Caitlin. I'm Doug King from the Museum of Flight. You've heard us advertise a couple times today, and a lot of you are going to join us Thursday night. I spent most of today talking about Meyerson about how much I want that rocket that he's flown 4 times, but now I just want to say, Don, can we have the Star Wars stuff on display? Really cool.
I'd love to.
This question you just asked is really relevant. I'm old enough to have worked in Silicon Valley in the late 1970s. I hate to admit that, but I was in rooms with people like this who were talking about something called a personal computer. And the people that I worked for at Hewlett-Packard, or the people across the street at IBM, if you asked them about it, would say, just like the folks you talk about that say, are you kidding about space? They'd say, why in the world would you want a computer in your home? This is the closest thing I've seen since to what's about to happen. And so for people who are in the field, I guess the thing that convinced me most was when Chris Lewicki and Peter Diamandis stood at the Museum of Flight and announced planetary resources. One of the 150 reporters that were there that day asked, are you hiring? And Chris said, no, he had 8 people at the time, by the way. He said, no, we're not hiring, but we want to hear from people who want to change the world. And they got 2,000 resumes from young people around the world who want to change the world. That convinced me there's something real out there. We've talked several times about the students from Racebeck Aviation High School. By the way, did anybody say this morning that this is ranked by U.S. News and World Report the #1 high school in the state this year? Congratulations. But in between are a lot of people like the gentleman who just asked the last question, so how can I get in on this? And I'd like to introduce Ofer Lapid from the board of International Space University to tell you about something really cool that's going to happen here in Seattle this fall for all of you who are in that boat. Ofer?
Thank you. So in order to succeed in space, first and foremost, you have to get proper education. And the best place on Earth to get space education is in the International Space University. How many graduates we have in the room right now? Quite a few. And your 2 co-founders, Chris. Yeah. They came.
Robbie was a lecturer there that didn't attend.
But Robbie was. Yeah. So quite a lot of space entrepreneurs come from this International Space University because first and foremost it teaches you how to cooperate in space in a multinational, multicultural, multidisciplinary manner, which is the only way to succeed in space. So without further ado, we are announcing today the first time ever that the International Space University is coming to the US to present a space executive course in October 3rd till October 6th, 7th, in the Museum of Flight, and that will be your first chance as a veteran executive to transition into the space business, to learn all you need to know, and be connected to the space mafia, this large alumni of 4,000 strong alumni throughout the world, in space agencies, in industry, in startups, in all space industry. And once you're part of the family, we'll take care of you. So the announcement is already online. It will be in GeekWire today. There's a website, there is a registration site. Space is highly limited. We have only a few seats, so hurry up and register. It's the first of its kind, but there will be more coming later.
Thank you. And thanks to the panelists.
We really want to thank the International Space University. This is a huge honor for the Seattle area, but it's also open to anybody else. There will be boarding available. You'll have tours, you'll have courses, you'll have introduction to the space industry, essentially, for people who are in other industries now and want to learn more about it, for potential investors, those of you who are CEOs or potential investors who want to help educate people to assist you. This is the opportunity. This is an outstanding short version of the 9-week course that Erica mentioned earlier, and we're looking forward to it. We'll also, so as Ofer said, check out GeekWire. Alan Boyle's written a great story about it, and we will also make sure all of you get full information October 3rd to 7th at the Museum of Flight. And we'll see you there Thursday night.
The website is up.
All right, thank you.
Big round of applause for the panelists today. Thanks, guys.
They wanted to get computers, or manual labor, a bunch of high school kids, to come in and circle craters and measure their diameters so that they could do study and analysis and so forth. And so a friend of mine and I got involved with that program, and we thought, this is really boring. Why are we sitting here drawing circles and measuring craters? And instead, we took some images on a brand new scanner the school had, and then wrote some code in Pascal, I know, and then effectively automated that process. In the course of doing that, I got particularly excited about Mars and thinking about space exploration and so forth. And that sort of launched me down that path. But in parallel, I was doing all of this computer work and building machines and the like. And I got very, very lucky because at the time, Hughes, which then became Raytheon, was also looking for interns. So when I got into college, I got a job working on EKB, which was one of the last strategic missile defense programs. And so they took this 19-year-old kid, put him through the clearance program and so forth, and then put him in a lab and said, okay, here's an avionics platform, get it tested, get it ready. This is flight hardware. Oh, and it's going to launch in 6 months. Of course, delays happen and so forth. But I got a chance to do that, and at the same time be a part of SETS, which is the Students for Exploration and Development of Space. And when we got the EKV program to the point where it was ready to do our first launch, they invited a set of us to come into a room, and they said, okay, you're going to see some classified stuff and so forth, but this is the launch. You're going to get to watch it. We watched the target go up from Vandenberg. We watched our vehicle go up from Kwajalein. And I remember feeling the tension in the room as the rockets went up and everybody getting excited and hearing, okay, we've acquired telemetry. Okay, the cryo system is running. Okay, we've got images, so on and so forth. And then eventually, this ground-based telescope shows us this bright flash as the two vehicles intercept. And I thought, oh my God.
Principal Avionics, Communications, and Power. He's got the longest title, Planetary Resources, who's responsible for really the brilliant brains within our Arcid spacecraft. He also makes sure of being my colleague that I do not post non-ITAR compliant files on Dropbox or social media, which, I heard upon my interview at Planetary Resources that I could potentially be prosecuted in a federal court of law for posting our avionics boards on Twitter. So if you're wondering why we don't have more images of our spacecraft on social media, it's because Ray's maybe a little bit gun shy, but that's his job. Don Widener, owner of Formidable Ventures. He's also an investor in Planetary Resources and a great friend of the team at Planetary. He's often at our team barbecues every Friday. He's also been a big part of furnishing our office to be industry appropriate, as I call it. And he can talk more about this. But the funny story about Don, and I laugh hysterically every time I think about seeing him drive up the driveway to Planetary Resources in his Tesla with the hatchback open and a life-size Boba Fett hanging out of the back. So if you come to the Planetary Resources office, Boba Fett is our security guard at the front there. And I almost got fired for calling him Boba Fett the first day that he showed up. And as Cameron said, I'm not a rocket scientist and relatively new to the space industry. And advice for anyone who's thinking about making the switch to space, make sure all you young kids over here, you know your Star Wars and Star Trek folklore, and all episodes, not just the new stuff.
That's good.
Because your bosses will probably be on the old episodes. Ooh, burn. And I've just met Chris Boschhausen. I said it right?
Yeah.
Kind of. Who's the entrepreneur in residence at Data Collective VC. And I just met him, but I can confirm that he's a super cool dude, so he deserves to be on the stage. We do have some past connections today that we are reminiscing about when the Antares rocket exploded, carrying both of our team's spacecraft in the Transformers movie-worthy explosion that happened back in 2014. So we kind of certainly both connected on that and know what it's like to experience failure. But in the spirit of NewSpace, we pick ourselves up and we get on the next rocket, right? So all these amazing people on our panel currently making huge, huge impacts in the commercial space sector, many of them here locally, which is fabulous. But they really have so much experience in other industries and areas of study. So today we're going to learn a little bit about their unique backgrounds and how it brought them to their career today, why they made the move into the space industry, and where they see their careers and the industry going. So I kind of turn it over to our panel here and maybe start with Chris Boschhausen, and if you could tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to sitting in this chair here today.
Yeah, so I wish that I'd gotten here on a Pan Am space shuttle that got me from Sydney to here in 4 hours, but that doesn't exist yet. But the reason why I'm in the space industry is that's sort of what I've always wanted. And, I saw the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was a kid and grew up on space, but, there was no real space industry in Australia, and I was kind of frustrated. And obviously by the time 2001 rolled around, my big question was like, where is my space station? What happened? And so space, at least, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, sort of went through a bit of a slowdown. And in Australia, there was, since having launched the third satellite into space with a British-US collaboration in the late 60s, Australia hadn't launched anything really of note into space. And so there was no industry at all there. And I originally thought, well, let's just be a test.
Everyone, just want to check to make sure this is on. Okay. Thanks, Cameron, for that nice introduction. I'm thrilled to be here, and as Cameron said, I'm a native Seattleite, and it really is a pleasure to be, in my hometown with all my nerdy, geeky space friends for kind of the first time. So, and if Jason Andrews is anywhere, he'll appreciate me saying "Go Dogs." If anyone, okay, there are a few dogs hopefully in the crowd. So as Cameron said, I'm Caitlin O'Keefe. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Planetary Resources, and I'm super honored to be among all of these folks here today. These really are some of the most impressive people that I personally know in the industry. And before I kind of, hand it over to them to introduce themselves and talk about their amazing career paths to this point and what the future holds, I kind of wanted to give you some cliff notes of some of these people based on my personal experiences with them to kind of set it up. So Erica Wagner, Business Development Manager at Blue Origin, and a dear friend of mine who is also a co-founder of the Museum of Flight Future Leaders team here in Seattle. She also taught me how to geocache. That was a new thing that I learned this year that I'm really proud of. And if you haven't read her bio yet, I would suggest not, because it's going to make you feel like you're really underachieving every single day. Erica, you see her name a lot in the Seattle community, and I'm sure also the international space community. She's certainly an important kind of figure here in the Seattle space community, and I'm happy to call you a friend. And a big congrats for the 4th launch and re-land for Blue Origin. Really excited. Ray Ramondar.
Pilot, let's go off to NASA, become a pilot. So I went to, when I was 17, to the Air Force Academy in Australia, went through the whole interview process, and then about 2/3 of the way through, they grabbed me by the collar and pulled me out of the line and said, "You know you're colorblind?" And I was like, "What?" And so apparently I failed the colorblindness test. Which apparently it wasn't, I only failed by a little bit, and if I'd known, I could have gamed it, but I didn't know. So that door closed, and I was like, well, damn it, I'm just going to build my own goddamn rocket. And so that's sort of the impetus for the path that I'm on, which was space was expensive. It seemed to be the domain of governments. It was really hard to build anything. So I figured if I'm going to build my own rocket, I either needed to be ultra rich, or rockets had to be cheaper and easier. And I was at a conference in 2004 in Vancouver during October, and it was an event that happened in the Mojave Desert. And on a whim, a bunch of 10 of us booked a flight from Vancouver down to LAX, got a rental car and drove into the Mojave, and watched Scaled Composites win the SRE X Prize. And on that day, looking up, seeing this plane, I had this realization that, you know what, space is no longer the domain of governments, and that gave me the confidence to later on move on to help start Planet Labs with my co-founder Will Marshall. This realization that commercial space was now possible and that we could do it. And that's sort of the abridged sort of version of how I got here.
Thanks. Ray, would you like to talk a little about yourself?
Yes, sure. So I think there were kind of two things that happened when I was in high school that sort of led to the career path that I ended up. First, someone gave me a great book by Tracy Kidder by the name of Soul of a New Machine. If you haven't read it, it's spectacular. I strongly recommend it. And then second, the Lunar Planetary Lab at the University of Arizona was doing a crater counting study. And